Hello and welcome back to Cuppa with a Pro, a new series on the podcast where I chat with professionals who work within the birth, pregnancy and postpartum sphere. In today's episode, I am chatting with Kiersten. Kiersten is a student midwife, and what she takes us through is the behind the scenes of being a student midwife. We chat all about the benefits of having a student midwife, as well as the important role that they play in providing women with continuity of care, regardless of the model that they're going through, and the essential role that this can play in a woman's pregnancy and postpartum journey. You will also hear about Kiersten's midwifery philosophy, and to paraphrase her, how she doesn't believe that women need to be empowered because they have their power, but they need to not be put in situations where they are potentially losing their power, so to speak. And I thought that was a very unique and a very beautiful way to go about her future midwifery practice. And finally, this wouldn't be a real behind the scenes if we didn't chat about the reality of what being a student midwife entails and what it actually looks like. So in this conversation, we chat all about the alarming burnout rate among student midwives, as well as the exposure to trauma that student midwives can experience from sometimes their very first year on, whether that is on placement or that happens when they are following their woman through their continuity of care, because we know that sometimes birth can take many different shapes and forms. And so we chat about how to manage trauma as a student midwives and the resources that are available and whether those are sufficient to help cope with the trauma that has been experienced. And without further ado, I will leave you with Kiersten's episode. I hope you enjoyed as much as I did. You are listening to Cuppa with a Pro, a new series on the podcast Cuppa with a Doula, where I chat with professionals working within the birth, pregnancy and parenting sphere, and we chat all about the area of expertise in the aim to try and raise awareness about very important topics that affect moms and moms-to-be, and also to help you to feel empowered to have the pregnancy, the birth, and the parenthood journey that you want to have. Hi, Kiersten. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So, since I'll leave you to introduce yourself. So, do you want to tell the listeners your name, where you're living, and what you do as a profession or a soon-to-be profession?
So, I'm Kiersten. I live on the Sunshine Coast in Queensland, and I am a student midwife in my second year, halfway through the degree now, actually. So soon to be a midwife, but not quite.
Yeah, well, you're getting there. Second year, that's really good because it's a 3-year degree, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Perfect. So, well, I guess to start this podcast, let's talk about, people know what a midwife is usually. What is a student midwife? Obviously, I mean, it's kind of in the name, but I guess where I'm going with this, is what do you do for women, while you're studying? How can you help them? How can you help, pregnant women and probably moms who just had their babies as well?
Yeah. So the degree, like you said, is a 3-year degree. And part of that degree, we have to do 700 hours of placement. And then we also have to do something, in my university, we call it the Connect program, but it's basically continuity of care, where we have to follow 10 women, some universities do more, from the beginning of their pregnancy, birth is they're comfortable, and their postpartum journey. Mm-hmm. And so that's on top of our placement. So our placement, we would be placed in the hospital working on the postnatal ward or on the birth suite or in the antenatal clinic. And so we'd be doing and learning different things in each area. And then as well, we're following people that we've built a relationship with through their journey. And so we have full scope of practice in that we can be involved in antenatal, birth, and postnatal care.
Wow, that's amazing. So, I mean, you're under the supervision of a midwife, but you're practicing as a
Always.
midwife would, right?
Yes. In the beginning, it was lots of watching and trying to get my hands on where I could. Now, halfway through my degree, I feel that in certain cases, I can act more autonomously, and a midwife just double checks what I'm doing, make sure that I'm doing it safely, and always the safety of the woman comes first. So someone's always over my shoulder watching what I'm doing to make sure that what I'm doing is correct.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I guess that's how you learn, isn't it? You at least you're hands on, you're doing it, and then you've still got, I guess, the safety of someone being there to either say yes, that's how you do it, or correct you if needs to be done a different way. So that is really good, and it's I guess from from a woman's perspective, from my perspective, having a student midwife who actually provides the continuity of care is amazing, because you don't get that all the time in the system. I don't know, have you been placed mostly in midwifery group practices, or have you been placed more in models where women just meet their midwife, who is the midwife who's on call at that point?
I've been very fortunate in that I've been able to work in all different models of care. So I've worked in group practice, I've worked in just core where they have a different midwife each time. And then I've also been able to see the private side of midwifery care as well. And I've definitely seen the difference. There's a huge difference when you have a known person with you, or know the midwife that's looking after you, even if it's just antenatally, having the same midwife, being able to build that relationship and that trust makes a huge difference. And then I guess having a student is a way to have that continuity of care, even if you're in a model of care that doesn't allow for it.
Exactly. And that's where you guys do this this amazing thing, where you're providing continuity of care, and you're doing it, you're not getting paid. You're doing it on top of your studies. You're doing it during basically your free time. And I know that some student midwives, even though they've seen their 10 women's and they've reached their quota, so to speak, they still continue to do this, even though they don't technically have to for their requirements.
Yeah, it's crazy. And I've been asked before, if I wasn't paid for the rest of my career, would I still be a midwife? And I can honestly say I think I would. I think that you have to have passion and you have to have love for what you're doing, because we don't get paid for what we're doing while we're studying at all.
And I think that's important to say, because see, I didn't know that. Well, I don't think I realized that. I don't think I thought about it, so I didn't realize it. So I think it's important to put it out there and say, student midwives, you are helping women. You're providing continuity of care. You're providing an anchor point, because sometimes you are the only one that the woman has seen through a few appointments, and you're the only familiar face in the birth suite, which is so insane. But that is how the system is. And then what you do is absolutely amazing.
I like to say that we're walking birth plans.
You're a walking birth plan. I like it. Well, yeah, because you would know the woman's birth preferences, but by that point, by the birth, you've seen the woman a few times. Because you need to do 4 antenatal appointments. Is that right?
Yes, 4 antenatal appointments, the birth if the woman's comfortable, and then 2 postnatal appointments.
Yeah. And so for the postnatal appointments, do they have to be in the hospital? Is it while the woman is in the postpartum ward, or is it when maybe she goes to the postnatal clinic, maybe, if there is such a thing, or where do those take place?
So those can be with the maternal child health appointment. It can be at the 1 week and 6 week appointment with the GP, or it can be while they're still in the hospital.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense. You mentioned that before, and so I just wanted to come back on it. The passion that midwives have and the calling. You're basically called to, I'm guessing, to be a midwife. Did you always want to be a midwife?
I did, which is kind of amazing, because not many people can say they've had their career path picked out for them their whole life.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't always know what a midwife was. I'm originally from Canada, and midwifery is very different in Canada. And so when I was younger, we moved to Australia, and that's when I learned about what a midwife was. And from there, I was sold that that was what I needed to do. And then I just worked really hard throughout high school so I could get the right ATAR or OP score when I had graduated to be able to get into the degree straight out of high school.
Wow, that's amazing. But so let's do a little diversion now. What is the maternity system like in Canada if they don't have midwives? What do they have?
So they do have midwives, but they're usually for home birth or are all private. So they're not covered under public health care.
Okay, yeah.
And then they usually it's obstetrician-led care.
Oh, interesting. That makes for a whole new perspective on birth, I feel, to have obstetrician-led care as a mainstream system. So that's interesting because if you had stayed in Canada, would you have become a midwife, you think? I mean, it's obviously a tough question to answer.
I actually applied for psychology there.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Nice.
Got into university for psychology. That was my backup plan. Really glad that didn't work out.
Yes. I see. Interesting.
I don't think I'd be a good psychologist.
And so since you, I guess, kind of know the system in Canada and you know really well the system in Australia, so in your different placements, since you've seen public system, you've seen private system, have you seen any home birth? Have you been in touch with private midwives? Is that a field that you learn about or you see about in your placement?
Yeah, so unfortunately my university does not allow us to attend home birth. Something about insurance.
Okay.
It doesn't make sense to me. It's something I'm on the Midwifery Society of our university, and it's something that we have taken to administration quite a few times. And unfortunately, it's just not something that's happened. And I don't think will happen while I'm studying. But there is hope that maybe if home birth became public, that then we would be allowed to attend. But as it stands right now, we aren't. But I have been working with a privately practicing midwife who facilitates home birth. And so I will attend the antenatal and the postnatal appointments, and I just won't attend the birth.
Oh, that's interesting. I find home birth to be I don't know if grey area is the right term, but you've got midwives that work in public systems, you've got midwives that work in private system, but anything to do with home birth, from my understanding of how a midwife goes on to become a private midwife that can be insured for home birth, my understanding of it is it's actually quite complicated and you have to do a lot more hours after you're qualified, and then you have to be endorsed and you have to jump through a lot of hoops. Is that right?
Yeah. To become an endorsed midwife, you have to do a certain number of hours working first, and then you have to do like a prescriber's course to be able to prescribe medications, things like that, to get your endorsement. But you can actually be a second midwife at a home birth straight away as soon as you graduate.
Interesting. And so what I'm finding interesting is, so your uni, do they tell you about a home birth? Like, do they tell you about the benefits and, the risks that are involved, or is that kind of not really mentioned in your degree?
Yeah, hugely. My university, I think, is very holistic in its approach to what it's teaching us. We used to be taught by Dr. Rachel Reed. Some people might be familiar with her with her books and her courses and things like that she has out. She wrote Why Induction Matters. We learned heaps from her. And then before she left to pursue more book writing and courses and things like that. But our approach is very holistic. We always talk about, if we were in our version of a birth suite, what would we be doing? not what is expected in a hospital environment.
Yeah.
Because procedure and just because it's been done one way all the time in the hospital is not actually the correct way to do things. So we critically analyze things like the Queensland Health Guidelines and things like that to look at the research behind them, if there is any research behind them.
Oh, that is really good, because I was going to say, and I don't know how to put this in any ways that's not critical, but I was going to say it's sometimes at uni, so through my degree, my experience, I feel like a lot of the things we do at uni is learning to do things one way. So you learn the textbook, and then you have to recite the textbook, and that's how you become qualified, at least in my experience. And so I was going to say, when it comes to midwifery, there's just not a right or there can be a wrong way, I feel, but sometimes there's more than one way to do things, right? And birth is just so, it evolves at, every second something can change, which can lead to a cascade of things, right? Which can either lead to something really good or something not so good, right? And so it's great that you guys are critically reviewing guidelines and going, does this make sense, from the perspective of you as a midwife, but also for, the woman actually, could these guidelines be outdated? Maybe sometimes. And it's good that you're learning to think. You're not learning to repeat a skill. You're learning to actually analyze everything and go, okay, I feel like the best approach at this moment is this, but I'm always reviewing my approach because things change in birth.
Yeah, it's evidence-based practice is what they want. It's at the core of who they are as a university and as who I like to think I am as a student midwife, is that at the end of the day, evidence is what you can't argue with. And so if my woman has a preference that aligns with the evidence, but it goes against the guidelines, evidence is going to win at the end of the day.
See, we need more midwives like that. Midwives that, obviously, you do want to be evidence-based, that's right, but you also want to be, evidence is coming up, every day. There is new research, there is new things being published that show that some of the things we were doing are now not really relevant, or they're a bit outdated, or there is a better way to do things, actually. And it's essential for midwives and for other health professionals, obviously myself included, to stay on top of that research and to just know that maybe something we've learned however many years ago will be outdated in a few years, actually, and we'll say, oh, actually, we used to do this because that was the evidence. New evidence shows this now, so we don't need to do it this way.
It puts me in awkward positions sometimes as a student because I'm coming in with the most updated information.
That's right.
And I'm coming up against midwives who've been practicing for 20, 30 years, who've just always done it one way. Yep. Where I'm coming in and going, actually, the evidence around mastitis management has changed and is new and is different. And I have to know how to navigate those conversations delicately.
Oh, that's a tough one. Have you had to do it? And how do you tell someone who's been practicing for 30 years that she's outdated?
Yeah. Usually it's just, I try and pose it as a question. So have you heard the new evidence around this? And then that usually starts the conversation. And unfortunately, they often reply with, oh yeah, I saw an email about that. Didn't think it was relevant.
Oh, yeah, okay. That's a good way to go about it, actually, because...
But, yeah, I think having students around, you as a midwife, when I am a midwife, I'm excited to have students because they are going to be my wealth of knowledge of the new evidence, of the new information that I can easily have access to without having to do the research, the work myself. It's just, oh, you learned that? Great. That is my new practice.
That's right, actually. That's a really good point you're making. That makes sense. And so when you've been on placements, have you found that you've been quite welcomed, and your questions and potential, oh, I've been taught this, have you found that it's been received well, or have you had a few midwives that have gone, yeah, look, I know better because I've been in the industry for, a really long time?
Yeah, luckily I have not come across a midwife I don't like yet. Everyone has been welcoming, and I love learning, which makes it easier to make mistakes.
Yeah.
And so when I make a mistake, I see it as an opportunity to go, oh my goodness, now I get to learn how to do that properly, or I get to learn what the information is around that. And it just lost my train of thought.
That's great.
Yeah, learning, love it.
No, that's
Midwives are great.
Go midwives.
Yeah.
This is a really big topic I want to talk about. So, in my podcast, I try and talk a lot about advocacy and women being empowered and having a voice and not being told what to do, but encouraging women to ask questions and also encouraging them to question their provider. So question, why are they recommended, an induction or a stretch and sweep, or, just asking without being obviously nasty, just questioning and opening up the conversation. So do you find in your practice as a student that the women you follow, are they able to advocate for themselves, or is that maybe something that you help to facilitate as well? And I guess, how is the system receiving that advocacy, women trying to question the system?
Yeah. So I guess the first thing that's part of my midwifery philosophy is I don't believe in empowering women. I believe that they already have their power, and that it's my job to make sure I'm not taking that away. Yeah, they already have the power, and we should not be putting them in situations where they feel that they've lost their dignity, that they are too vulnerable, that they are being forced or coerced. And so those are big red flags for me that I will every single time put my foot down and ensure that a woman is feeling safe. When it comes to how much I need to do in terms of advocacy, often that depends on the woman and how much education she has around birth herself, how much she wants to know, how much she wants to be involved. Like I said before, I am a walking birth plan. And so often it'll be gentle reminders to the midwife, like, oh, she doesn't actually want to know how many centimeters she is, or she wanted to wait for white for the cord, not just 3 minutes. Things like that. Those will be my moments of mentioning things to them. And then also, I believe in providing information. At the end of the day, I do not care what decisions my women make, as long as they are making a choice that they feel informed on, that they know the benefits, the risks, that they have trusted their gut on what they need to do, and that they're not rushed into the decision. And so just following that BRAIN acronym, if you've ever heard of that, the benefits, risks, intuition, nothing. If a woman comes to me and says, I want a natural birth, but I am educated about epidurals, I know the risks, I know the benefits, I know that it might slow down my labor, but it might also give me the rest I need. And then we get into labor and she decides she wants the epidural, I am 100% going to support that and be happy that she's made the right decision for her. Not because somebody has told her she needs to have an epidural, but because she knew all of the information surrounding it.
Exactly. And just as a reminder, because you mentioned it, great spot to talk about it, the BRAIN acronym stands for benefits, risks, alternatives, intuition, and nothing. So it's about basically when a woman is thinking about her birth plan, her birth options, thinking about even postpartum, so thinking about the maybe intervention she does or doesn't want once baby is born. It's about basically the BRAIN acronym helps to come up with questions. So it's about asking, what is the benefit of doing this? What are the risks? Can I do something else? So that's your alternative. What is your intuition telling you? Your guts, basically. And what happens if I do nothing? And just knowing this acronym sometimes is a good way to just spark a conversation with your healthcare provider and just kind of see that there's something else that can be done that maybe aligns more with the woman's philosophy, or maybe actually I don't want to be doing this, I want to do nothing, or actually I'm really happy with the benefits and the risks, I'm happy with that balance, I feel like, for example, an epidural is the right course of action for me. Right, there you go.
Yeah, exactly. Well said.
So with the women that you have followed, what profile of women are you following? Are they first-time moms? Do they have children? Do they want a natural birth? Do they want are they open to medications? What type of women are you seeing?
I'm seeing everyone and anyone. So I've had a second-time mom with twins. I've had a first-time mom with a breech baby that was going to go for a vaginal breech birth, but it ended up in an emergency C-section. But she still had a wonderful birth.
Yeah,
I've had second-time moms, first-time moms, full scope, where they have pregnancy complications down to I barely hear from them because their pregnancy is going so beautifully.
Okay, cool.
Yeah, I feel like I've seen. I wouldn't never say I've seen it all because every birth is very different. But yeah, definitely I've seen a lot.
Have you seen vaginal birth after C-section? I feel like there is a lot of talk about it at the moment because the guidelines are showing us that a VBAC, unless there is a complication or there is some form of high risks, is safe as birth after a cesarean. Yet I feel like a lot of those women that want to go for VBAC after a C-section are met with a lot of obstacles and a lot of refusal. And sometimes those are, I feel, not very much evidence-based.
I've not had a Connect woman have a VBAC, so a woman that I'm following, but I have been involved in the booking in appointment process. So the very first appointment you have with the hospital, and we ask about your birth preferences then. If you've had a previous cesarean. And so I've seen, unfortunately, sometimes that coercion into the having a repeat C-section. And I've also seen the flip side where practitioners are very supportive of VBACs. So I feel like I've seen both sides.
What do you do when you see the coercion? Like I'm guessing, it sounds like with your philosophy, you're on the woman's side. So as you said, it's not about she needs to have a VBAC. It's about what does the woman want. But if she wants to have a VBAC and she's coerced into, oh no, let's just do a repeat C-section, isn't that horrible to watch?
It is. And unfortunately, as a student, I don't have a lot of pull or power to pipe up and say a lot. Something that we get told at university all the time is get your degree, then change the world. So sometimes I have these moments where I unfortunately just have to hope there's another midwife down the line that's going to say something, because in the moment, if I'm sitting there and it's just me, the woman, and an obstetrician, there's not a lot I can say in that moment without putting my degree at risk, unfortunately. But other times, let's say if it's a Connect follow through, I'm able to have these conversations in the waiting room, or I'm able to suggest literature, and I'm able to get in little bits of evidence into the conversation to try and shift their perspective. But yeah, unfortunately, sometimes I am in situations where I can't say anything because I have been reported before for standing up to obstetricians. Wow. And I say that with a smile because I'm like, oh, I actually was brave and said something. Obviously, when I was reported, the midwives did not do anything because I wasn't practicing out of my scope or doing anything inappropriate. Yeah, I have made obstetricians uncomfortable.
Sorry, I find it really funny that, and sorry, don't take this the wrong way, but you're a student and you've made an obstetrician uncomfortable. This is extremely funny because it's almost like, I feel like, generalization here, I feel like obstetricians look down on midwives and you've made an obstetrician uncomfortable. That's actually really good, I feel. Wow, that is really good. Good on you. It takes bravery to stand up when you're a student, because I've been a student on placement and I felt like I was no one. I felt like I was a cockroach on the wall. So me standing up as a student was borderline not happening. You're standing up to an obstetrician. Gold. That is gold. I love it. Keep going. That is so good.
And I will say I'm team obstetrician and midwives working together. I absolutely believe there is a place for obstetricians within our healthcare model, and that we have to be able to recognize and respect pathology as practitioners and know when we need to ask for help. And so I've met obstetricians that I've absolutely loved and adored and have worked amazingly with. But yeah, sometimes I say things that make them question if I'm a witch or not.
Oh, okay. Nice. No, and you're right. It's a really important thing to mention that obstetricians, they have a time, they have a place, and some, just like some pregnancies are not complicated, but there are some factors, some red flags, some complications, essentially. And that's when an obstetrician sometimes is the best person maybe to oversee this woman and to just ensure that she's getting the right treatment, interventions, and so on. And it's great when obstetricians work well with midwives, and that's probably what happens the most in private practice, where it's an obstetrician-led care with maybe one or a team of midwives that will be, I'm guessing in a private practicing hospital, when a woman is in labor, she would be met by the midwives, and then the obstetrician would come in when they are needed, when they're able to come, I'm guessing.
Yeah. I've not worked in a private hospital, but my understanding is the same, that the obstetricians come towards pushing time.
And I mean, if that's, if they're not required before, then that's probably a good time for them
I don't
to come.
believe so. It's not a model of care that I've had enough experience in to have a formed opinion on. I would definitely need more information, but I know some people are attracted to private hospitals because they get a known practitioner.
Exactly. That's right. That is right. And so that leads me to my next big topic, the topic of a continuity of care, which is, it's such a shame that we know from evidence that midwifery group practice or any continuity of care program for the woman is gold standard. And for a low-risk pregnancy, a healthy low-risk pregnancy, it is the best way to go. It has the most benefits for the woman. It has the best birth outcomes for both the woman and also the hospital. It helps to save money for the system, yet it is only available, I believe, to 8% of the Australian population in this country. So what are we doing wrong?
A lot wrong. It's really sad. And that's where I feel so honored to be in a space where I'm able to help bridge that gap as a student. I get to offer continuity of care for free to people who would not otherwise be able to access it. And so they don't have to go and pay for a private midwife. And if they've missed out on group practice within the hospital model, they have one last chance at getting some continuity of care.
Exactly. And that's where, it is amazing to have student midwives. Something we haven't mentioned actually is, how do you find your woman? Is it the hospital that helps you to, basically they facilitate the meeting between the woman and you, or are you the one trying to find women and trying to make yourself known to them?
Yeah, so with my university, we are not allowed to advertise ourselves.
Okay.
So often from other universities, you may see in Facebook groups like called the Student Midwife Australia, you may see people posting about themselves, and then mums will comment saying like, yes, I'm interested. Unfortunately, we are only allowed to put forward our information if a woman puts forward her interest first.
Okay.
So I'm often on that Facebook group just scrolling, waiting for somebody to have posted about being in my area, looking for a student midwife. The hospital also has a book that just sits near one of the staff areas that will put the woman's information in if she's interested in a student midwife. And then we can go through that book and pick based on due dates or based on complexities or anything like that, and then we can contact from there.
Okay, well that's good, and I'll put in the description the link to that Facebook group called the Student Midwife, because it's a really good one. There is another Facebook group which the name escapes me now. If I find it,
I think it's a student for every woman or something like that.
Oh, it might be too. It might be. I'll put the link to it also in the description, because those are really good places. As you said, you're not allowed to advertise yourself, so you have to rely on the woman posting and saying where she's birthing, her due date, and so on. So, if women listening are wanting to have a student midwife, that's one way to go about it. Facebook, those two Facebook groups, there will be hopefully students around. Otherwise, as you said, the other way to go about it is during the first, I'm guessing, the booking appointment, mention to the midwife or whoever you're seeing that you'd like, or you maybe would like, or you're thinking about having a student midwife, and then they maybe can facilitate the meeting between student midwife and the woman.
Yes, exactly.
Because we need more continuity of care. We know it helps to benefit the woman, and therefore it reduces the costs on the system, if we're going to talk money here. And yet it's just not available enough in Australia. And those group practices, they're very small. They can't accept every single woman, so they fill up quickly. And sometimes it's the luck, right? It's maybe that month is not so busy, so those women get in, but other months are busy, the spots are limited, and it's such a shame.
Exactly.
What would be your best advice for a mum to be, potentially a first-time mum, trying to navigate, the system? Because sometimes it can be quite hard when you don't know what you don't know, right? So you don't know what options of care you've got. You don't know anything about pregnancy. You've never had a birth before, so you don't actually know how that goes. What's your best piece of advice for mums and mums-to-be to, I guess, navigate everything about pregnancy and parenthood?
Yeah, I guess a really good starting point is with the information your hospital provides, if it provides information. Understanding your hospital's policies and recommendations of care helps you to know where you're starting, and you can build off of that. So does your hospital provide a pool for water birth? What are your options for pain management that is available to you? Things like that. So at the hospital that I'm placed at, we have a little congratulations book, and it's filled with lots of information like how to add iron to your diet, all the way through to what to pack in your hospital bag. And that is a really great resource that I swear by, because it has everything in really basic terms. And then if you want to go deeper from there, go based off of what you're interested in. Don't go based off of, I need to know everything, because you're just going to get overwhelmed and not know where to stop or where to start. If you go by what you're interested in and what you want more information off of based upon really basic stuff, you're going to have a much easier time digesting the information that you're reading. Really good resources are things like the Midwives Cauldron podcast. That's really good. Or the Great Birth Rebellion podcast. Highly recommend those two resources, because it's digestible and aimed at the consumer, or presents evidence, doesn't just present opinion. But yeah, definitely my biggest piece of advice is go based off of what you're wanting to know more about, not what you think you need to know about.
Yeah, that's a good information. It's overwhelming. Pregnancy, navigating the system, and then postpartum it's a lot. It's difficult to sometimes know where to start and what you need to know, or what is good to know, I guess. And that's I'm talking from personal experience right now about my first birth and my first pregnancy, where I didn't know much, and I didn't know what I didn't know, and I wasn't sure what I was going to walk into in birth. And then I thought, like, I think that might be the experience of a lot of other women out there. Somehow we focus on pregnancy, we focus on the birth, we don't really prepare for postpartum. And that's actually the majority, like the rest of your life, is having your baby and looking after it, or looking after him or her. And we tend to forget that, and that's something I've learned the hard way. So interesting. And that's the other thing, that because you don't know much as a first-time mom, you feel like you have to know everything. So you read the books, you do the courses, you listen to all the podcasts, and that is sometimes too much, and you buy all the baby stuff and so on, right? But I think we need to, as you said, we need to focus on taking it one thing at a time. So what information are you getting? What question does that raise? Maybe this new piece of information, and then sort of building it up from there. Because when I was pregnant with my first, I felt like I had to know everything about everything when I was 4 months pregnant. So when I was 4 months pregnant, I needed to know everything about birth, but it wasn't the right time. And there was a lot of things that I wanted to know that were more relevant to the stage of pregnancy I was at, but somehow I needed to know everything about what was going to happen in like 5 months. And I don't think that was the best approach for me. So I'm putting it out there that maybe we need to take it a bit slower, and we need to just enjoy the pregnancy without being overwhelmed and trying to consume information, and maybe just chill a bit. And that leads me on to my next question, which is, are you involved in birth parenting education at your hospital? And if so, how are you finding it?
We do have the option to attend some of them, but unfortunately due to COVID, most of them are online now, which sounds funny saying now because COVID is kind of not really a thing. But it went online and hasn't gone back in person.
Okay.
And so it's not really the same. We have the option to attend. It's not something that's attracted me overly, because a lot of it is just about providing information about what the hospital offers, which I feel very well educated on. There are some breath, mind, and body courses that my hospital does. And those ones are really good because they provide skills in pain management and things like that. But when it comes to the parenting side of things, I don't really see my hospital offering too much.
Okay. I feel like it's not just your hospital. I feel like it's common, probably because, well, the hospital is mostly involved in the antenatal care, the birthing care, and then the immediate postpartum care. And that's probably about it. So I guess maybe that's where they just find that is all they provide, really. So that makes sense. So are you finding that the general feedback with those online courses is that they are seeked by women, or are women saying, no, it just doesn't suit me to have those online, I just can't really, it's not as interactive, interesting, and so on?
I think they're actually more accessible being online now, because then partners can attend them together. True. Even if they can't be together. If work schedules, things like that. So they actually are very well received. People book them in straight away and they fill up quite quickly. But what is missing is the connection between mothers. Mothers groups aren't really being facilitated by child health and things like that. And that's what's missing, is the connection between mothers and between couples.
True. That's a really good point. And that's something I'm finding through the podcast, that the early postpartum period is quite isolating and lonely. And if you're the first in your friends group to have a baby, your friends usually can't relate, and they just don't understand what you're going through. And then it's hard to meet people. I mean, usually there is a mom's group in your area. Sometimes there isn't, or sometimes it's on a day which doesn't work, or it's at a time that doesn't work, or you just can't always make it, maybe, or sometimes you go, but it's hard to put yourself out there, I find, sometimes. Maybe it's just me, I don't know.
No, that is something I'm hearing over and over again. One thing that was beautiful to see was I was looking after a mom from Brazil, and she ended up forming a moms group for other moms that were from Brazil, just on the Sunshine Coast, and managed to gather a whole bunch of moms together. And that was beautiful. And I wish I could see more of that. I'm involved in some mothers group just so that I have sort of a pulse on the community of what's going on. And then if anyone's looking for a student midwife, I'm already active in the group and can say, hey, I can help. And you'll see moms post like, hey, I've started doing this walk every morning. Anyone want to join me? And mothers are desperate for connection. They will absolutely put their hand up and say yes. It's just not being facilitated like it used to be. It used to be set up where it was like mothers group at the library every Friday, 9 a.m. But it's not happening like that anymore.
No, that's right. There is a fair bit, like through council, you've got things like Rhyme Time and other more baby-led, I
Yeah.
guess, activities. I feel like they're more baby focused. So they, even though you're there probably usually as a mom, I mean, sometimes it can be the dad attending. I feel like it's just, I feel like during those, rhyme times and so on, it's all about the actual rhyme time. And it's not about, oh, let's introduce, everyone in the group and let's discuss, let's talk about this or let's do that. And therefore it's all about, okay, well, we read the book, we talk about that. Okay, time's over. Okay, everyone goes home, bye. And it is a shame because, as you said, this connection is essential. It's everything that we need. We need people that can relate to us, that understand what we've gone through, what we're going through, what, that you can talk about baby stuff with, but also that you can talk about like non-baby stuff with, because sometimes you don't want to be talking about your baby all the time.
Yes.
We just don't have that, and that's a shame.
Yes, exactly.
So since you're seeing a lot of aspects of midwifery, where do you think that you want to go when you graduate as a midwife, when you're the one in charge without anyone over your shoulder?
I want to work in continuity. I've known that since like second week of midwifery in school. If I can even call it that. Second week of university. I can go anywhere. So the hospital that I'm working at now only accepts one student into continuity of care a year. And so I'm not going to put all my eggs in one basket and hope that that's what I'm going to get. I am young and don't have kids of my own. And so I can pack up and move quite easily. So basically, Australia is my oyster. But more than that, the world is my oyster. And I could go anywhere. I am quite attracted to the idea of going to rural Uganda for a couple of months. I'm connected with a hospital there. And they've been looking for a midwife to come over. So that might be something that I do.
That is amazing. Rural Uganda. The contrast you would get from finishing your degree in Australia in a first world country with, hygiene standards and so on, to going to rural Uganda where they probably don't have much of anything and let alone a midwife.
No.
Wow. The amount of learning you do on the job would be insane. That would be awesome.
Yeah. The hospital I'm connected with just got their own water source. And just to put it in perspective, they didn't have their own water source before a couple of weeks ago. They, I've seen their neonatal resus kit, and it's essentially just a bag mask. Whereas when I think about my neonatal resus kit in the hospital, I've got a drug box, I've got CPAP and PEEP, and I've got pulse ox saturations and all of that. Whereas, over there, you don't have that. It's your hands is what you have at the end of the day.
Actually, that's a good transition into something that I was thinking about before. So in rural Uganda, because they have very, they don't have much. They've got very sparse means. I'm guessing the mortality of either the woman or, children being born is quite high. Have you, in your degree, I'm guessing you'd be informed about trauma and how to deal with that yourself to avoid burnout. Is that right?
I think we need more of it.
Okay.
Because we are becoming burnt out very quickly, especially as students, because we're working all these hours and not getting a lot back other than in terms of the oxytocin high of birth. I wouldn't change it for the world. I absolutely love what I'm doing, but paying to do it is something else. It's something different than being paid to do it or just doing it for free. It actually costs me to do it. When it comes to dealing with traumatic situations, we do have debrief. So we do have facilitators we can go to talk through things. But often we'll rely on, there's actually a helpline that midwives and student midwives can call, specifically designed for us if we've had a hard shift, that we can contact and debrief on, which is really good.
Yes, because I can't imagine the mental load that goes into, being a midwife and being a student midwife, because as you said, as a student midwife, you're endorsing the role of a midwife. You've just got someone that's checking what you're doing is correct and so on, but you're essentially a midwife. The mental load, obviously you're always on the lookout for, what's happening, is there any flags being raised and so on. And that's already exhausting, but let alone when maybe something traumatic unfolds from the birth, and or we could be talking about a stillbirth, or a woman's life could be at stake there, or a baby's life. That is obviously super hard to deal with. And it's good to know that you've got a helpline, you've got facilitators. But is that enough?
I don't think it is. We don't even talk about it much
Really?
in university. Things like I was speaking with a peer of mine who's a year below me. And in my first year, one of our first classes was about termination of pregnancy and stillbirth and things like that. But they removed that class and didn't even talk to her cohort about that. And so she was faced with it on placement and was talking to me about it. And I'm like, oh yeah, didn't you go over that in class? And she's like, no, it was completely missed. And so even just the one class, I'm talking just 2 hours on it, was missed. And I do believe in my third year, they go over it a bit more, but we are confronted with it before the third year. So it does feel too late to be having discussions about it. I found my own practices and my own ways to deal with traumatic situations. So I have a specific candle that I light every time there's been a stillborn. And I always count stillbirth in my, I have a little love heart collection where I count all of the births I'm present at. And yeah, stillbirths are counted in that as well, always. And having little rituals and little practices has definitely helped me in the process of anything traumatic happening, making sure that I go home and have a nice hot shower and cozy up in bed and things like that. And yeah, debriefing with the appropriate people.
We don't talk about that enough, the mental health side of being a health professional, and especially one that deals with life and death, because I feel that's what midwifery is. You know that you've got two lives in your hands, or potentially more for multiple mums. And we don't talk enough about burnout rates and trauma being experienced by the healthcare providers that are in the room. Obviously, it is traumatic for the mum, the parents living it, but there's also health professionals in the room that are also experiencing a form of trauma. I'm not saying it's the same or it's greater or lesser, we're not measuring trauma here, but it's really sad to hear that they're not helping you guys to learn how to deal with that trauma, because as you said, you're exposed to midwifery care pretty much from your first year. So you're exposed to the real world with the real consequences of health complications in birth and so on, but you don't have the tools to deal with those because, I don't know, the uni's removed classes or they're just not providing resources. That's really sad to hear. And then obviously you go on to become a midwife. Do you know if a lot of young, graduate midwives drop out of the career early on because, well, the job is hard, essentially?
I don't know the specific dropout rates of grad midwives, but I know within my degree alone, the dropout rates are high. So even just getting through the degree is impossible at times. Yeah, there was only, I think it was either 13 or 20 people that graduated, whereas we do an intake of about 70 people.
Really? You've lost like 2/3 of your cohort by the time 3 years have elapsed. That's insane. Wow. That could explain why we've got a shortage of midwives in Australia, and obviously a shortage in rural places and so on, but that's another discussion.
Yeah, and finding grad positions are impossible. So even after you've finished your degree, you are a qualified midwife. You then have to do an extra year within the hospital, being paid less to learn the ropes, is what they like to say. And so you're, being paid less, you get rotated through different aspects of the hospital. And getting those grad positions can be very difficult. They're very competitive.
That is, and we spoke about that when I called you. That is backwards. It just sounds really backwards. You've done 3 years to become qualified to be a health professional, and then you're treated like a student again in a grad position when you've got your degree. You've done the placement, you've done the hours, you've done the 10 women, and you still have to learn the ropes. I mean, obviously it's an ever evolving field, and you do have to learn. There's always something to learn. You never stop learning. And yes, when you come to a new hospital, you would need to learn their procedures, how they go about things, and so on. Do you have to do it for a whole year and be paid less for it? Questionable.
Yeah. And you don't even technically have to do a grad year. It's just become that's what is expected. And so you can have a hard time getting a job if you don't do a grad year.
Oh, that's that is backwards. That is really backwards. That is all I can think of to say. So when you graduate, how do you go about finding a position? Do you look for public hospitals? Is the money better in private hospitals? There are also some position in community. Am I right about this?
Unfortunately, private hospitals want you to have a double degree in nursing and midwifery, so that they can put you in different positions within the private hospital. That's not an option for me because I'm doing a straight midwifery degree. Otherwise, you can go and work in a public hospital. And within the public hospital, you would do a grad year and be rotated through doing antenatal clinic for a couple of weeks, then doing birth suite for a couple of weeks, then doing postnatal for a couple of weeks, and rotated through. And then hopefully at the end of it, you can apply for a contract. And whether or not you get a contract is questionable.
Oh gosh.
And whether or not you even get a permanent contract as well. Yeah, it's quite tricky. And I'm only coming from a perspective of one hospital. So it could be very different in a different part of Australia where it's like, no questions asked, you can get a position. It's just very competitive at the hospital that I'm placed at.
Yeah. And I'm guessing, obviously when you graduate, you can work, I'm guessing Australia-wide, right? They would have surely the same requirements. I've seen, for example, in New South Wales, rural New South Wales, I've seen places that actually advertise they're looking for midwives, and they actually advertise the position with a retention bonus. So I'm guessing those places which are remote, they're not, they're not the place you think about living maybe, and they're not near a big city, they're not near the sea, you're not going surfing every day. I'm guessing those towns are probably hiring anyone who's qualified and who they deem to be the right fit, probably easier. But it's hard to recruit professionals in general to work in really rural areas sometimes.
Yeah, and often for rural, they'll want a midwife who's at least done their grad year, because you'll be one of a few midwives. And so then that also gets a bit tricky. But some do offer grad programs, and those are easier to get into than in busier areas.
That's interesting. It is very interesting. And talking about the types of hospitals you've been placed in, have you been placed in hospitals which are of a higher level, so they've got they can basically cater for prematurity, and maybe they have a NICU as well? Or have you been placed in, I guess, smaller hospitals where you have to birth there after your 37 weeks?
Yeah, so the hospital I'm at has a special care nursery, and so I think it's from about 32, 33 weeks. Obviously, if they need higher care than that, we will transfer them to the Royal Brisbane and Women's Children's Hospital that's in Brisbane. But we do have like a certain level of special care that we will accept. And so just last week, I was at a birth for twins at 33 weeks, and they were able to stay at the hospital. Yeah.
Wow. Have you seen a special care nursery? Like, have you, I guess, done a rotation there? Have you seen what it's like?
We do rotation in third year, but with my experience with the twins, and then with another elective C-section where the baby just came out not quite ready to breathe. She was just a little bit stunned at being born. Sometimes that happens. They're just like, oh, hang on. I've gotten some experience that way, but I haven't done a shift. We do that in third year.
Right. That's interesting. Yeah. Wow. Yeah. 33 weeks for twins is, twins we know is usually synonymous with prematurity of sorts anyway.
Yeah.
But 33 weeks is probably confronting and probably low weight and so on. Wow.
Yeah, they actually did really well. I was able to check in on them the next week, and they were off their breathing support. They were just feeding and growing and had a bit of jaundice, and were doing really well.
That is great. Wow. That's amazing. It is so interesting to hear how difficult it is to be a midwife. Like, as you said, surviving the degree essentially because you're a student. So you go to uni, you have classes, you have assessments, you have exams. You've also got placement. You've also got women who you're following. You probably don't have free time because when would you have free time at this point? That's pretty much your whole life. That's insane. The work you guys do as a student midwife is amazing. The work midwives do is amazing. And I cannot say it enough on this podcast. And I use this podcast to tell midwives that their work is amazing. We need more midwives and we appreciate the work they do because they are supporting women. They will help women in any capacity they can to birth the way they want and to get the care that they need, whatever that looks like, and to get the support they need through sometimes difficult periods and other times the most beautiful day of their life, obviously. Thank you. Thank you so much for being a midwife. That is amazing. We need more of you.
Thank you. Thank you. And yeah, I hope that throughout this podcast, I've made it clear that this is absolutely a passion of mine and is something that I can't imagine doing anything else. I feel utmost honor to be in the position I am in.
That's right. That's right. And the whole point of this podcast was to get you on to talk about the things that, for example, I didn't realize when I was thinking of getting a student midwife. So things like, obviously, you guys are, as you said to me, you're on the woman's schedule because the woman schedules their appointment. Obviously, the birth is the birth. No one can predict it. But you just, you attend those appointments out of the goodness of your heart, really, and you make time for those and you attend a birth, and a birth can be however long it can be. But I mean, as you've probably got a shift time, and at some point your shift ends as well, and as it should, because you need some rest as well. And it's amazing. Being a midwife is a selfless job, and we need more midwives, basically.
We do. One of the best moments, I think, throughout this degree is one of the moms that I journeyed with then reached out to me to ask how she could become a midwife. And that was the perfect completion of the circle of life almost, where I was like, oh my goodness, now you're interested in doing what I do. And so, yeah, I've been having lots of conversations with her about what that looks like.
What was your first birth like, actually? Was it a mind-shaping moment, the first birth that you attended?
I actually felt like a fly on the wall. I actually didn't enjoy my first birth, if I'm being honest. I was so freaked out and anxious. I just stood in the corner doing the documentation and was like, oh my gosh, a baby just came out. What? It wasn't until my third or fourth birth that I was doing the catching myself, wasn't just standing in the corner documenting, was really hands-on and involved and had journeyed with the woman throughout her whole pregnancy. That moment when I lifted up her baby to put her on the mom's chest, that I almost cried. Got all teary and was like, this is why I'm doing what I'm doing. But it took a while for me to have that moment because I was so worried about making sure everything went right and so worried about making sure I was doing the right things that I was forgetting to be present in the moment. And now every birth I attend, I almost cry. Because I'm really good at being in the moment now while still making sure I'm doing everything right and that everything's going well. But it took a while for the nerve to sort of go away and let me enjoy it.
Yeah, and it's not easy. Your position is not easy because, well, you're a student. I mean, again, no disrespect there. I've been there. I've been a student. I felt like no one really. So that's how I felt.
Yeah.
And it's hard. And as you said, you have so much responsibility even as a student because you're always on the lookout, you're always watching, and that takes, a lot of mental load obviously. And so therefore it's hard to find a balance between watching, keeping a close eye, and also being the physical or emotional support that the woman wants or needs at that point. And also every woman is different, right? So the way you support one woman during her birth for your next birth, that next woman might not want the same support. Sometimes they want you to be hands off or to be just present in the room. They maybe need you to talk to them, chat to them, reassure, so on. Whereas other women will probably want you to be maybe providing some physical support. Maybe they need a hand to squeeze. Maybe they need their shoulders rub. I'm not sure if that's something you do, but I'm guessing the support is different for every birth anyway.
Yeah, hugely. There's a quote, I can't remember who said it, but it facilitate what is happening, not what you think ought to be happening.
Ah, that's a good one.
And yeah, and I think about that quite a lot where I'm like, okay, what is actually happening right now? What does the woman actually need me to do? Not what do I think needs to be happening according to what I physiologically know what's going on. Is she comfortable doing this? Does she need a position change right now? Or does she just need water? Does she need a cry? Sometimes I'm struggling with a new mom that's trying to breastfeed and really she needs an emotional release. And then once she has a good cry, baby latches. And it's like, see, I'm facilitating what is happening, not what I think ought to be happening. Yeah.
Wow. Question. As a midwife, can you tell by the presentation of the woman, the way she behaves, the way she is, how dilated she is? Or can you estimate it, I guess?
You definitely, yes and no.
Okay.
You can tell sometimes definitely by like a groan. If a groan and the sound has dramatically changed and her positioning has changed. So she's gone from being able to talk between contractions to now she can't talk between contractions. She's just resting. Progress has been made. If she goes from being able to stand through a contraction to now she likes to kneel on the floor, progress has been made. And then there's definitely some sound changes that it's hard. I can't describe it. But a sound will change and I'll go, there's a baby there.
That's amazing. Do you get taught that at uni or you learn that on the job, right? You don't get taught that in a textbook.
On the job for sure. We do watch birth videos at uni and then we'll be questioned, how we'll just listen to a sound woman laboring and be questioned, how often were contractions? How often were they lasting? Do you think they were moderate? Do you think they were intense? Things like that to get us used to the sounds of labor and what we're looking out for. But really it comes with the job and it's something that I've been learning. So like we'll be getting a woman up for an epidural. She'll start changing the sound and then the midwife looks at me and goes, nah, she's about to have her baby. And I'm like, oh, that's what that was?
That is amazing. So as a student midwife, have you seen birth that was, I guess, not textbook? And by that, I mean a birth where maybe the stages of labors were, I don't want to say not respected, but maybe you thought, she was only in like, she was only maybe 5 centimeters, but she was actually 10. Do you know what I mean? Have you seen a unconventional labor?
Yeah. So I've all labor I feel like is unconventional at this point. Nothing is following the standard textbook like process. The very first Connect birth, so where I followed her, she went from 3 centimeters to 10 in an hour. And that was quite a shock.
Wow. For you or for the woman?
Yeah. Both of us.
Wow.
She
That
kept
is,
asking us if she was pushing, and we're like,
oh.
you need to tell us if you're pushing. She's like, am I pushing? And then the baby's head came out, and we're like, yes.
That's amazing. The woman's body is amazing, right? Like we just know how to birth a baby, but I feel like
Yeah.
we
Oh yeah.
physiologically we have the ability to birth a baby, but sometimes it's all in the mind. It's about trusting your body to birth the baby.
Huge. Yeah.
I mean, obviously, we're talking again. We're talking a low risk, healthy pregnancy. We're talking probably an optimal baby positioning and presentation and so on, right? If you put all the right factors in, we have the ability to birth a baby. Sometimes we just have roadblocks, mind roadblocks.
Yeah, hugely. And it's all about, and it's not even the mind roadblocks. Sometimes it's just being in an unfamiliar environment, or being observed, or just little things that disrupt the oxytocin and the cycle of the good hormones that enable you to get through the labor. If those are disrupted, then you're kind of fighting an uphill battle.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. We talk a lot about the environment being right, the environment allowing the woman to have oxytocin, the main hormone involved in birth, flowing when that environment is unfamiliar, feels unsafe, or you're feeling interrupted, really, then yes, that oxytocin flowing is interrupted as well, and therefore that can stall labor. We know that.
Or even the noradrenaline that's produced in response to the oxytocin, that helps your brain cope with the labor. And if we're disrupting that cycle, and so that noradrenaline is not releasing, you're not going to be able to cope with the labor. So you could still be getting good contractions, but your tolerance is reduced.
We're so complex as human beings.
Yeah.
It must be so fascinating what you're studying. Well, talking in my opinion, because obviously I'm super interested in the human body as well. It must be so fascinating, and then to be able to do your theory learning at uni, and then you see it in real life in your placements and with your Connect women. It must be amazing to be able to just learn the theory and then put it in practice and or visually see it and experience it through the woman. That must be amazing to just be able to connect the two and go, this is what we're talking about. Wow.
Yeah, exactly. Just at the birth I was at last night, her contractions stopped when she came to hospital, and I was able to say, like, yep, learned about that in university. When she finally got her contractions back and was back into labor, she was kneeling on the ground with her knees in, calves out, just instinctively. And I was like, learned about that at university. And so it's all these little moments where I'm like, oh, I know this. I know what's happening. I know why she's doing that. I know why. I know that the CTG is presenting this way might mean that the baby's doing a little turn, or that baby's well oxygenated, or that baby might be lower down in the pelvis and struggling to get oxygenated, things like that.
Fascinating. Does your hospital facilitate maternal assisted C-section?
It unfortunately does not. It did at one point, I've been told, but then there was something to do with infection risk and they stopped.
Okay. Yeah, I feel like that's another big topic that is like starting to be spoken about from women who they want or they need to have a C-section for some reason, and just feeling like you're more involved in the birth by having a maternal assisted C-section, if that's a wish. Not that a C-section means that the woman is not involved at all. That is not what I mean. But sometimes it can feel empowering when you're the one that lifts your baby out of you, basically.
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful thing, and I would love to see one someday.
I've seen a video recently of a maternally assisted C-section, and it just looks amazing. Really, just you can see the room is filled with just so much positive vibes, and it's just feels a bit less sterile, let's say, because you're in an operating theatre at this point. It just feels a bit more warm.
Yeah. And I've seen some really beautiful cesareans at our hospital, thankfully, like the breech birth where she had an emergency cesarean. It was category 3, so that means it's low on the emergency risk. So it's not like we're rushing immediately to get the baby out. It was just that the CTG was showing us the baby wasn't as well oxygenated as we would have liked. And so we were able to play music. We were able to have the partner there the entire time. She was able to walk into the operating theater, fully in control, got skin to skin, got breastfeeding, got everything that she still would have wished.
That is beautiful. That is beautiful. And as you said, your role is to help facilitate the woman's wishes. And sometimes, an emergency C-section is the way to go. But you can still have your wishes even though you're having a C-section. So the plan can be slightly changed and it can still be a beautiful birth. Definitely. That's right.
Yeah, exactly.
Have you seen a category 1 C-section where it is an absolute emergency to get the baby out?
I have not. I've had peers that have, and I think that's one of those situations where it's also traumatizing for the staff involved. But thankfully, our hospital has a debrief program where the staff involved will come in and speak with the woman and her partner and debrief the birth if it was a traumatic birth.
That is good. That is good, because I think birth debrief is not done enough, for the woman, for the birthing woman and the partner. And I feel like it can lead to the woman then bringing on this baggage for subsequent birth, or it can be sometimes that is the deciding factor between having one children and having 2.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I'm sure that you've got stuff to do that don't involve talking to me, so I think maybe we'll wrap it up. What do you think? Thank you so much for your time.
It's been absolutely lovely chatting with you.
Thank you so much for your time, because you were at a birth last night and you're probably super exhausted and you've still come on the podcast, and thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. I really appreciate it. It's been amazing. I've enjoyed every minute of this. It's been so good learning about different aspects. I'm sure there are things we haven't spoken about, so I can't say learning all about what it's like to be a student midwife, but I've spoken about a lot of things. So thank you so much for giving me and the listeners an insight into what it's like. And I wish you all the best in your degree and in your career. And thank you for becoming a midwife. That is amazing for women like me.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed chatting with you.
Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. If you want to get notified of when a new episode comes out, please subscribe to this show on your podcast listening platform. Also, I would really appreciate it if you could leave me a review on Apple Podcast or share this episode so that other moms can find it. If you would like to tell your own pregnancy, birth, or parenting story, please head to the show notes and you will find a form there to get in touch with me. Again, thank you so much for listening, and I will be with you again next week for a new episode.